Welcome to the Utah Stories Show. So if you've been following our program for a while, you know we've been covering housing and homelessness. And one thing about reporting on homelessness is you really don't have anything if you don't have numbers, statistics, and data. And really, good reporting consists of all those things. If you don't have the data, you don't really have the facts, and you can't really tell the truth. And so on the program with me today is James Buhanin, who has been auditing government agencies for the past 36 years, and for the past 4 years he's been focusing on homelessness in Utah. He's been looking at the homeless resource centers, he's been looking at the homeless agencies, all the money that's going into homelessness, and his job is to help hold that money accountable, hold these homeless resource agencies and the money that's going in to help show a cost-benefit analysis. And James, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
So, I did a real deep dive into the report you produced back in November, the first audit that you did of the resource centers, and I thought it was great because I had never seen anything like that produced from the newspapers, and it's exactly what you need because, I mean, there's just an adage in business and management, you cannot manage what you do not measure. And is that sort
Agreed.
of the philosophy?
Yeah. And we've received feedback from legislators, major donors to homeless services, that they really want to know if there's a return on their investment. Mm-hmm. They pour a lot of money into homeless services. And, the question keeps coming back, so what did we get for what we put in there? You're asking for more money, but what was the result of what we spent before? Mm-hmm. And they can say, well, we spent it on homeless services.
Yeah.
And
very vague.
Concern that a lot of us have is that, well, how many of these folks are just cycling in and out of different programs, going from a shelter to a drug treatment program to the street to jail to permanent supportive housing and then back to the shelter.
Mm-hmm. And they don't know.
And we don't know. We ought to have an answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
We have the data. We just haven't done the analysis.
Yeah, I talked to a group of mostly young people in Pioneer Park about 3 weeks ago, and I just asked them, so what have you guys done in terms of, have you gone to the shelters, have you gone to treatment? And they all said, yeah, we've been to the Odyssey House, and then we've been to the resource center. We don't like it. We like camping outside.
Yeah.
We like getting our food stamps, and we like getting, while I was there talking to them, they got 2 different lunches given to them by 2 different nice organizations. Great. And then there's like the Nomad Alliance, which comes and gives them tents and sleeping bags or coats, and the Volunteers of America does the same thing. I mean, it seems like we are slowly starting to conform to the model that California, Portland, Seattle are all, going with, which is, let's let these people camp outside, let's let them defecate in the street, let's just help them survive. And what does your organization see as the problem?
Our response to that would be, that's fine. It depends on what your goal is. Now, and that's something that I always did when I was legislative staff, is I would say, okay, legislature, you are the policymakers. You've got to decide what it is you're trying to do. We can't measure outcomes unless we know what a positive outcome is.
Yeah.
And so if your goal is to just get them off the street and into housing, then we can measure that. But you need to know that unless they get treatment for that mental illness, unless we do something about their criminal tendencies, you're going to have a pretty messy situation in that housing.
Which is exactly what's happened.
And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Now, if your goal is just to keep them alive, and we don't care if they're in a shelter or on the street, because a lot of them want to be on the street, then let's make that clear that that's our goal. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a very good goal.
Well, we know where we're heading toward with that Band-Aid
We've seen
solution.
it in California.
Yeah, you just get more tent camping, more neighborhoods destroyed, more needles everywhere, more people who don't want to walk outside. And it seems like that's the direction we're heading toward. And the way I see this, and you tell me if I'm wrong, downtown Salt Lake City leaders, and especially the homeless leaders, they're very progressive, but the mindset is kind of this liberal libertarian, where let's let them live.
That's an interesting combination when you see liberal libertarian, because you usually see those on opposite ends of the spectrum.
And I actually used to call myself, liberal libertarian. I'm more liberal when I'm in the city, but I'm more libertarian when I'm in the country. But they're applying libertarian values in the city when it relates to people who are camping in the streets, saying, oh, let's not enforce the no camping ordinance. These people are just trying to survive, which is true. I mean, I've encountered more people who are temporarily homeless who just got priced out of the housing market, and they're just trying to survive, and they have really nowhere else to go. And it's crazy. Like a guy who I talked to a few weeks ago was living in a tent, and it was 105 degrees outside. He's like, I just lost everything. I don't have anything. I was living in my car, and I'm here now. But then they're camping alongside of people who are maybe long-term heroin addicts and been long-term chronic homeless people. And then at the same time, you've got your wolves who are preying on these people, feeding them, giving them drugs, and committing crimes, and all sorts of, like, rape is going on, and muggings. And so it's like you
cannot imagine how awful it is in those camps.
It is,
the kind of abuse and victimization that goes on there, the filth. The Pioneer Park Coalition, as we drafted this plan, we came to the position that that's not healthy, that's not acceptable.
No.
That it will only lead to our community turning into what we see in San Francisco. You'll see businesses closing down. You'll see businesses leaving and residents leaving.
And they are.
And so we've got to do something. And the option that we have envisioned is that we focus on treatment. But to get there, we first got to get them out of those encampments. And so we have to have the shelter space and space in, as you mentioned, that some of these folks, they don't want to live in the shelter. And I've been inside those shelters. I can't blame them.
Yeah. Back in 2015, I went through the downtown shelter, and it was absolutely awful. Maybe you went through it about that same time.
I went through it at 1 a.m. Let me tell you, nobody's sleeping in that shelter at 1 a.m.
Really?
It's chaos.
Really?
A lot of drugs.
People just using drugs.
I saw drugs in the shelter at 1 a.m.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I asked this question yesterday in your press conference. So that property was located next to the Weigland Center, next to St. Vincent's, next to the 4th Street Clinic. It's like the ideal location in terms of being near all the resources. Yeah. But it was outdated. The model, the management was terrible. It was all it was obviously, Scott said, you had the women's shelter, the men's shelter, and the children all kind of side by side, and the children would get off a bus, and then they'd be surrounded by these homeless men, and it was a bad situation. But the property itself, why couldn't have that just become a different usage, a different
you could have ripped
model?
It down and built another one. There was concern about having 1,000 people in one place, homeless people. That's quite a burden.
Yeah.
And the burden on the community is pretty massive.
But isn't the burden greater now?
Now the Haven for Hope. And so we went, I wasn't part of that thing, rationale. We made a decision, our leaders made a decision back then, to divide it up into 4 different facilities. Mm-hmm. So you got the family shelter down in Midvale, the men's shelter, the men and women's shelter, and the women's shelter. So you got 4 different facilities. Used to be just the family shelter part-time and the downtown shelter. Having it all in one location, there's some advantages to that. That's what they do in Haven for Hope in San Antonio, which we really like.
I've been looking at that.
But it's really well controlled. They have their own police force on the premises.
Wow.
It's well managed and well controlled, and they're not all living in one room like they were in the downtown shelter. You had the building was not designed to manage that population. You had some rooms where there were like maybe 14 bunks, and you had another room where there might have been 80 bunks.
Yeah.
And in corners that you couldn't see who's doing what in the back corner, which is dangerous. Mm-hmm. And there's victimization going on in the back corner there. And so it just wasn't tolerable. There needed to be they need to be in a facility where they can get the services they need. And you couldn't give them the services in that building. So now we went with the idea of breaking it up and provide services, and these new buildings are wonderful. You've got kitchens, and you've got a nursing station there, and then places for service providers to come in, and you got your mental health provider in one back room, and so a lot of the services are in that building, which is great.
But almost every homeless person I've interviewed who's been there says it feels like a prison. That they say it feels like you're locked down and you better do exactly what they say or you're kicked out. And obviously you can't bring contraband in.
Yeah.
The difference between those facilities and SwitchPoint's model is SwitchPoint grants their tenants the trust to not feel like they're going through airport security. What do you feel like is the better model?
I have been to SwitchPoint, and they don't have that same magnetometer at the front door, but they have drug sniffing dogs that they don't have at the. They say they bring them in on occasion to the Salt Lake Resource Centers, but in Washington, in St. George, they have drug sniffing dogs, and they have the police on premises visiting on occasion. I think there's more control in SwitchPoint, at least in the St. George facility that I visited, than we see in Salt Lake. They say no, absolutely not. You're not going to bring drugs into our place. Well, they say that too in Salt Lake, but they still get in there. They're getting in there. You can't. And I agree with the philosophy is you can't completely frisk everybody. Mm-hmm. And so they're bringing it in their underwear someplace, in their socks, and they're getting it through. Except in the facility in Lantern House in Ogden. They make them take all their stuff and put it in a locker before they get into the dormitory, which is an interesting idea. Including their clothes.
And they don't check to see if they've got drugs.
Oh, they do.
Oh, they do.
They pretty well isolate the drugs. You want to go get your backpack, it's outside. You go outside. So,
well, the thing that I find difficult with the homeless resource centers and the way those have panned out is obviously those areas where they put them have become crime-ridden. And the neighborhoods have really declined and deteriorated. And you have really good statistics about that.
That was promise. A promise was made that we would not let that happen, and hasn't.
So who is holding that promise to you?
Okay, when the facilities were built, the owners. There's an operator of the facility, which is the road home in most cases. I think VOA is running the women's shelter now. Mm-hmm. But two of them are run by the road home. I think VOA had the same situation, though. They had to go to the city and submit a safety and security plan. And in that plan, you read how they will monitor activities on the street around their building. And it's like a certain distance, like 300 yards or half mile. I don't know what it was, but
they'll be responsible for any crime going on.
If our residents are out there causing havoc on the neighboring businesses, we will take responsibility. It's in the conditional use permit. That security plan was adopted as part of the permit that they had to get from the city to build the place.
Okay.
And so...
And the city is the one who licenses that permit.
Yeah.
Not the state.
Not the state. It's the city. And so the city, it's on the city and the provider to do what they said they were going to do.
And is the state giving a whole bunch of money to these providers as well as the city?
Some money, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, don't ask me to explain the financing. We do not have time to sort through all of the point different
is, like,
sources of money.
This is kind of how I framed it when I was thinking about it. The Utah State Legislature holds the power of the majority of the taxpayers' purse, and the city is the entity who is holding the NGOs of the Road Home and the Shelter the Homeless and the Volunteers of America accountable for what's going on at those shelters. The Utah State Legislature.
Are they?
I mean, no, obviously they're not, because they're not shut down. I mean, if
you can't really ask the legislature. You can't go around saying the legislature is doing this or that. Only when they pass laws, a bill or appropriations, that's when they speak.
Yeah.
And so you may hear some legislators say they're really frustrated with this or that, but that's not the legislature.
Well, I look at the Pioneer Park Coalition, and you, Scott Howell, Greg Hughes, are all former members of the Utah State Legislature. This is kind of an initiative to say, okay, it's not just Salt Lake City's problem. This is Utah's problem, because a lot of the homeless people from all over the state of Utah, they'll congregate to Salt Lake City because that's where the services are. And a lot of the homeless people I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, I'm from Magna, or I'm from Duchesne, or I came up here from Cedar City because I heard they had a little better resources. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really everybody's problem.
I've talked to several hundred of these folks, and they not only come from all over Utah, they come from all over the world. We had a woman right next to our conference, our press conference yesterday, who is from Sudan. She's terribly mentally ill. I don't know if it's drug addiction or mental illness. It's probably some of both. But incoherent, babbling, and showing signs of severe mental illness. Yeah. And she's from Sudan.
Yeah. So and with our open border, you get all sorts of people, I'm sure.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't respond to their needs.
Yeah. And so my point is that I've talked to, for example, Gene Hill from Catholic Diocese. I talked to Glenn Bailey from the Crossroads Urban Center. Yeah. And they say we need more resources. Like you don't want to the legislature doesn't want to acknowledge that the problem is a shortage of resources. It's not a shortage of accountability. It's a shortage of money, because they cannot afford to do the wraparound services because they're not paying caseworkers enough money. And if they could, then the outcomes would be better.
The caseworkers are not paid enough. They're not well trained enough and experienced. This is an extremely difficult population to serve.
Oh yeah.
And in a lot of cases, we're paying them like $15 an hour. Someone right out of the social, a degree of bachelor's degree of social work, and we're saying, oh, we're going to give you this population, and they may have schizophrenia, they may have severe drug addiction. We don't know their mental state, because after sleeping on the street for a few years, it's really hard on their mental health. Even if they don't have mental illness, they're going to have poor mental health.
So you don't disagree that there's a problem with resources?
That population needs better services, yes. But are we spending our money efficiently? And this is a question that's unanswered. I would love to somehow figure this out. If this system were efficient, how far would the current $200 million go towards meeting the needs of this population if we prioritized? I think we're probably not using, we probably need more resources, but we are not using the resources we have efficiently. And so I say, well,
because the outcomes aren't changing.
Let's look at. Here's an example I used in their press conference yesterday. We put someone into the TOSA program, which is one of the 5 or 6 that we think is a really good model. We ought to be doing more of these.
What's TOSA?
The Other Side Academy.
Oh, yeah.
This is more, they don't take people who are mentally ill. Mm-hmm. They will take people with drug addiction. And it's a 2-year program. They have a fantastic record of getting people into a working environment. There's a lot of community support. And they make people face up to their history and their issues.
And the neighborhood around the Other Side Academy is fantastic. Yeah, the neighbors love it.
They don't affect the neighborhood.
Exactly.
So I did a study. At their request, they said, "Hey, can you help us, figure out how well we're doing?" And so I said, "I'll do a study of your outcomes." And so I did that, and I took the 2 years before they started the program, and there was like 80 of them, and just in those 2 years, those 80 people had like 700 criminal offenses in 2 years.
Which costs taxpayers a huge amount of money.
It costs taxpayers. Just imagine, every one of those cases required a police officer, a district attorney, and a judge, and possibly some jail time. Every time they come through. And we see them coming through time and time again. And that's one of the issues we raise is, why are we keep imposing this expense on ourselves? If we dealt with the problem, we wouldn't have this ongoing expense.
Yeah.
So
that's a great
there's
point.
there's a need there to be more efficient. I looked at that, their experience of these 80 people after they get out. It went from 2 years after they were there, it went from 700 offenses to something like 95. And so by being in TOSA, these 80 individuals were transformed into law-abiding citizens mostly. Mm-hmm. And the net effect of that program on their lives resulted in a savings, you might say, of 600 criminal offenses on our criminal justice system and on our businesses and residents. So
couldn't quantify that into dollars?
No, we can't.
Because you don't know how much each offense costs on average.
What's put a price on the trauma of getting assaulted downtown.
Yeah. So also the victim side of it too is huge.
So,
but the point is, they go from being massive tax burdens to taxpayers probably.
Yeah, and so we have a population right now of about, and the thing is, we don't have the data. That's one of the big concerns we wrote in that legislative audit report, is we don't have the data to really know the breakdown of this population. And in this report, we suggest we go and do that. We got to get this data. Mm-hmm. And we've got some researchers lined up to do that. We just got to get the funding. But let's say we knew how many there are. A year or two ago, I thought it was about 1,300 that are hardcore, on the street, in and out of the shelter, that are mentally ill, drug addicted. A lot of them are committing crime, not all of them. Mm-hmm. But the ones that really need a lot of services. That 1,300 it could be 1,500 now, because the trend line is going way up. But let's say it's 1,300. 1,300, we ought to be able to provide the treatment for them, get them over their issues. If we're really good at what we do, like TOSA is, like the Haven for Hope is in Texas, if we could get after their treatment needs, stop having them just cycling in and out of these shelters in the facilities and the jails, we think it would be a worthwhile investment up front towards a better life for them and less impact on our community in the future.
Yeah, what you're talking about is actual rehabilitation, not what they usually happens in prison.
Yeah. But it gets back to, what is our priority? Do we have the goal to really transform people's lives? And that's the position that we as a Pioneer Park Coalition have made. Now, in the larger community of the homeless service providers, I'm not sure that's always their goal. They say it is, but they don't measure it. We don't track outcomes that way. And we think if it was really a top priority, we wouldn't see a headline saying we got 150 million we're putting into housing and shelters. We'd say we've got 100 million that we're putting into housing and shelters, and we got 50 million we're putting into services. Medicaid will pay for a lot of the services. Drug addiction and the mental health can be paid through Medicaid. It requires we jump through a lot of hoops to get them qualified. It's probably worth doing, but Medicaid will not pay for the case managers.
Really?
The staffing of our program to go and connect them with the service.
Which is the most important role.
Yeah,
far.
and that case manager is really critical. Interesting thing to think about. I don't know how it affects our analysis, but the Other Side Academy does it largely without public money.
Peer-to-peer support rather than case manager.
Most of what they do is they've got income from their businesses. These guys go out and work, which is, I think work is therapy.
Yeah.
But they also have a lot of donations. Haven for Hope in Texas, majority of it is private donations.
And is that near the city of San Antonio?
It's
right in the city?
right downtown.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. So
it was an old warehouse district, business district that was kind of falling apart, and they went in there and said, "We're just going to buy it all up."
Yeah, let's look at this video real quick of Haven for Hope. I've got it up on my screen. Okay. It's a 22-acre campus with 17 buildings and 250 employees. Can you show this? Troy?
Yep, you're on.
Okay, I'm going to play this clip.
Also for the community as well.
This is where around 1,700 people call home. This is Haven for Hope.
And the hope is here. It is. You got to want it and do it and apply yourself a little bit. That's all they ask. And it's all there for you.
And one of the things that I love about Haven is all the lives that we save, all the wonderful stories that we hear.
The Transformational Campus is one of the main parts of Haven for Hope, a place in San Antonio that offers housing and support services to the homeless population.
One time, a person said to me, everything I needed was here, including love.
Kenny Wilson is the president and CEO of Haven for Hope. He says they've housed and helped thousands of people.
I've watched a metamorphosis take place, not just the way they look to me or others, but the way they see themselves.
And he's seen the impact firsthand on the streets.
We do know that since Haven opened in 2010, homelessness downtown has decreased a little more than 80%.
While the data shows an overall decline, one statistic doesn't sit right with Wilson. The number of homeless families in the area increased by 18%.
But when a family comes to us with a child, children, a parent or parents, and they say, we're living in the car, we can't do it anymore, we do not say, I'm sorry, we're full. You can't come here.
Providing housing, education, and support services to all of these people doesn't come cheap at $20 million a year.
A lot of money.
Worth it?
Absolutely.
We ought to be able to afford $20 million a year. They do $20 million, and they said they had 1,700. I just said I think we have like 1,300, maybe 15 now. I'm sure we could get $20 million a year out of our existing funds.
So where would you put this? 27 acres and 17 buildings. I mean, that's not going to come cheap. Where would you put this kind of campus?
I don't know. That's the decision. It's almost like we've made a commitment to the approach we have now, which is to spread them out into places all over the valley.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like this is crime-ridden around the place.
Oh, it's not. I've been there. I met this gentleman and his staff, and it's very impressive. There are very few homeless downtown there. Now, I did press them and say, "Well, come tell me." I know there's some people who don't want to have anything to do with your operation. And they said yes. They are hiding out. They tend to go out of town into the county. You know, there's a lot of land outside of San Antonio, and they're just hiding out. But you don't see them. And they do their best to go out and reach out to them still.
Yeah.
So you can't say they've eliminated it. But I think we would be thrilled to have that kind of operation here. But it would mean that we would go in a very different direction than we have now. And right now, the thing is, I don't think people would really mind putting money into a program like that. I think, and people talk about, wow, how much would this cost? Well, my sense is that the donor world, and I've talked to the major donors in this state who donate to this, and I know the legislature's position on this. There is plenty of money for programs that work, and if
we had a $2 billion overage, surplus.
Yeah.
And most of that had to go to water because the Great Salt Lake's drying up, I guess.
I don't think we want to be competing with those kinds of issues. But I think what we could do is if we put together a plan that mirrored that Haven for Hope kind of operation, where we can show positive outcomes, people transforming their lives. And I think, your Utah stories, you ought to think about in the future, highlighting some of these success stories.
Yeah,
that people would be rushing in to say, hey, how can I help? You got a little feel of that when we started doing this tiny home thing out the other side academy is building out on Indiana Avenue.
Yeah, we had Samuel Granny on.
There's a lot of people that are just excited about that. Now, if you had something like that, now and mind you, the tiny village is not going to solve. It's just a narrow sliver of our homeless population that would
because
benefit from
you need 10 of those. That's 500.
Yeah, but that's
beds.
Also not something that everybody is going to be drawn to. There is a population of homeless that will love the tiny village, but it's not going to address a lot of the folks that are on the street right now who just don't like to be told what to do. You're going to be told what to do at the village. You're going to have to follow some rules. And so for this other population, we're going to have to tread a little more lightly. Haven for Hope has that option where you come in and they will send you to the best fit program that meets your needs. And I think if we were to develop an array of different programs.
So on the campus, you come in and it can be a place for recently priced out of the market homeless people, a place for seniors, a place for
most of those are very
addicts.
Brief stays, and they get them right into housing. They don't spend a lot of time at the ones that they really invest a lot of time in are those that come with a lot of treatment needs. But yeah, if you have a temporary housing crisis, you may stay at the shelter for a month and then move on. And they have all these housing units lined up. They will go to a landlord and say, we will lease your 8-plex permanently. We will have tenants in there. We just want every one of your units, and we will keep them filled up. And so that family that you just mentioned, if they don't have a lot of treatment needs, they would line that up and have them in there. We have that kind of thing already. We had them on their show. We have rapid rehousing.
The thing I wanted to also share with you, another clip, is of a 3 people I interviewed. I mentioned one of them, a guy who lost everything, and he was living out of his car, a senior man. He was probably 65 years old. And then with him was a guy who moved here from Logan, Utah, sold his townhome, thought he could find a place to rent. He's a painter.
Yeah.
Couldn't find a place. And then a young mother who was in her probably early 20s, who her rent increased, and she was just priced out of the market. She couldn't find another place. And my guess is she admitted she had some mental health issues as well. Yeah. But they were all recently homeless, and they could not find any service providers for their needs. Let me see if I can find this clip real quick here. Homeless at Sugar House. Okay. Let me know when you're ready, Troy. came when?
I came about 14 months ago.
And you're still looking for housing?
Yeah, I had about 12 grand, something like that. Just ended up spending it all at a motel.
Where'd you come from?
Logan.
Wow.
I thought I'd have a place in maybe a month at the most. But me and my fiance came down here and we reapplied probably 30 different properties. Never got in. Our credit scores are below 600 and we had a pet.
So the city's building like housing for chronically homeless people, but they're not building housing for, working people.
Low barrier housing. So the city is building housing for chronically homeless, but because it is not a low barrier housing, you have to have a decent credit score. And then you can't make over a certain amount of money, but you have to have a job. And there's just these ridiculous requirements that nobody that's been out here for more than a month is ever going to meet. Before I ended up out here myself, I was volunteering with the Nomad Alliance. I was out here every other weekend, and then every Wednesday, if not more often, helping people out, doing the DMV appointments, trying to help people find jobs. But when you can't shower regularly, you don't have access to water or power, and you have to take everything you own with you or risk it all being gone when you try to come back because the city's going to take it, or somebody else who doesn't know how they're going to make ends meet is going to take it. It's almost impossible to get out of this situation. Almost everybody out here has poor credit or some kind of criminal record that prevents regular housing. And when the city puts in housing that's not low barrier, but is low income, it still doesn't make any difference. Mm-hmm. It just makes it lets them look better without actually.
So makes them look better without actually doing anything. Do you see it that way? I mean, these people were all recently homeless. I guess my first question is, what should they be doing?
I understand that lady had kids with her. Is that right?
Her kids were staying with her ex.
Oh,
so
okay.
She was
we don't know all the issues that they have, but it looks like you said that she had some mental illness. Mm-hmm. She needs to get stabilized, and that was what our intention was with the resource center, and that they would go to the resource center for a month or two, get stabilized, see what your needs are, diagnose their mental illness, and get on a plan of action to get them over whatever those obstacles are to self-sufficiency, to a job. In her case, she probably needed some treatment, and so she would stay at the resource center for a month or two, ideally, and then should be off to some kind of deeply affordable housing that is supported by one of our service providers, and they call this permanent supportive housing. That's the ideal. And those kinds of programs can work.
Yeah, but according to her and Kevin, Brooke and Kevin, it's not working now. Neither of them were able to get the support they needed. I mean, obviously, right now the system is broken. The resource centers are broken.
Yeah.
But under what you guys are proposing, what would she be able to have?
Okay,
that's different.
So she needs to get into housing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that housing needs to have some structure to it. Our big beef with a lot of the permanent supportive housing is that there isn't much structure, much safety. There's drug use going on in those facilities. It's just not meeting their needs.
Well, if say you were in charge of these facilities, what would you do right now?
Well, first thing I'd do is I'd have 24/7 security. Mm-hmm. I would say, we're going to do some drug testing. We're not going to throw you out if you're using drugs, but let's monitor your drug use, see how well you're doing in progressing and getting off drugs. I'd have a lot of selectivity on who goes into different types of facilities. You don't want to have this woman in there with, some men who are, tending to
victimize women.
Yeah. Which is not something we're really good at right now.
Yeah. You mentioned in one of the permanent supportive housing facilities, a woman was raped.
Yeah.
And there's drug trafficking, sex trafficking going on. We have an inside source. It was verified by another inside source that's happening at the new Magnolia apartments.
Someone
system
was arrested for prostitution at the Magnolia.
Yeah, was using it as a...
So the first thing we got to do is provide a lot more structure and safety in these facilities. But yeah, she could be fine there. Another problem with this whole thing, and this is what we brought up in our audit report, was there's really not enough flow through the system. I was talking to the folks at Palmer Court, and I said, you got 200 units here. How many of those units would be available if you had a place for your residents to go, those who are ready to move on? And they said 15. We got 15 people who, if they had a Section 8 housing voucher, could move out into the community. It would just subsidize their housing. And so for 15 people, the lack of 15 housing vouchers, we don't even have to build the building. We just have to give them a voucher, subsidize their rent, and they can move out, freeing up 15 slots for 15 people who are in the resource center.
Yeah.
So we need to keep
They're just not
people moving.
You said there was people there who've been there for a year, right?
Where? There are people at Palmer Court who have been there since it was started 12 years ago.
Oh, I was talking about the resource centers, but Palmer Court too, 12 years.
Palmer Court has some there, 12 years.
Wow.
The resource center has people who've been there for a year, yeah. And so we need to get, the resource centers were not designed to have people for a year.
Mm-hmm.
They need to move on. We don't have places for them to move on to because people are stuck in those places and not moving on to what's next.
So the whole system's clogged right now.
Yeah,
and I know we're kind of running out of time, but the last point is, wouldn't truly deeply affordable housing be a big solution to this huge problem as well?
If you manage it right, yes. The problem is, so often we are so rushing out there to build more housing that we don't, like the Magnolia. You brought the Magnolia up. We spent $265,000, and that was before prices really went up. They were probably $300,000 now, to build those units
per unit.
Per unit,
17.6 million or something like that.
And it's not run very well. You have people coming in and invading an apartment and attempting to rape a woman. You've got drug use, and you go around the neighborhood. And I've taken pictures of around the neighborhood. These facilities attract that population. People have friends. Homeless people have friends in the apartment, and so they come and they are drawn there and they're camping out on the streets.
Yeah,
in
just
the neighborhood.
down the street, there's people now
and so you've created a mess for the neighborhood. Now that's not our vision. Our vision is we have more of these facilities, but they're well organized. They are treatment rich and providing services. They're structured, and they create the environment where people can heal. We do need more of those, but it's going to take some discipline and accountability. Mm-hmm. That's why we keep getting back to accountability.
Well, I totally agree, and I gotta say, I love that you guys had the courage to come forward with this plan. I think it's a great start. Where I've tried to have on Michelle Flynn. She was booked to come on. She canceled when I started criticizing Magnolia, when the information started coming to me about what was going on there. Obviously, there's got to be a better plan than what we have now. And so I'd encourage everybody to go check out the Pioneer Park Coalition plan, the grand plan. It's a plan to reduce homelessness and crime. And can people just find it on your website now?
We have been mailing it out. We've not right now. We are trying to get that up and going. Our website has not been well managed as of late, and we will get that on there.
Yeah, well, it's a great thing. I think that we definitely need a new plan, and I've been watching these abatements, and they're so heart-wrenching and tough to watch, and I have a lot of compassion for the homeless, especially the ones really trying to get off the streets that are really getting sucked into a much worse lifestyle than what they had before, and it's time to make a big change.
So what we've done is we've taken this QR code, and we send this out, and you can post this on your site.
Okay.
And so anybody can get the document if they just go to this QR code.
Okay,
Would
we
you
can
like?
do that.
I can email that to you.
Yeah.
And you can post it on your website. We're trying to use this technology to make it easy for people to access this report.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, James.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
And thank
really
you for
appreciate it.
your Utah stories and all the wealth of information you're putting out there. It's really
Yeah, I guess I've got sucked into this. I don't feel like I'm that interested in anything else. I think it's the most important issue, homelessness and housing, and for you to retire, kind of come out of retirement.
I should be
and do
retired.
this.
I should be playing golf every day, but I end up doing homeless things. So.
Yeah, but I think it's great lending your services to this. It's so important.
Thank you.
So appreciate what you do.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So next on the program, I hope I have this right. Amy Hawkins. Amy Hawkins is going to be with us. She's the chairperson of the Ballpark Neighborhood Council, and she's going to talk about what's happened to that neighborhood. It's really sad because the neighborhood has deteriorated a lot, and she's going to be with us in about 10 minutes, so I hope you stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, if you'd like to support Utah Stories, go check out our subscription page. It's $2 a month to subscribe to the magazine. This really helps us out right now because we're having a hard time with the labor shortage, getting drivers, getting the magazine, and keeping it free. Printing costs have gone up, and this really keeps the voice of local Utah in your home and prevents the tech censors from censoring good content, which we find is happening more and more often these days. So we'll be right back with Amy Hawkins, and we hope to see you on the flip side.